Hi, my name is Lisa Richardson, and I am here as a mixed blood Anishinaabe physician who works in internal medicine and also medical education. I'm an associate dean in the Faculty of Medicine and also started the Center for Wise Practices in Indigenous Health. And I spend a lot of time thinking about Indigenous medical education and medical education more broadly.
Thanks, Lisa. And I'm Allison Crawford. I'm a psychiatrist at the University of Toronto, and it's been such a pleasure to be on this journey of the body electric since 2015 with Lisa. And we've met many artists across Canada, and I really believe in the power of the arts to contribute to medical knowledge and to critique medical knowledge. And thanks, Sara Roque, for being here. Can you introduce yourself?
Ani Bojo, I'm Sara Roque, also mixed blood Anishinaabe from Shabananing, also known as Killarney, Ontario. I'm also little sister to Lisa. I'm an artist, an activist. I've worked in Indigenous arts for the most part of the last 25 years. I'm also a former juror member for the Body Electric exhibitions.
And today we thought in particular we would think not only about the role of art in medicine, but the role of Indigenous arts and what that might contribute to medicine. And we are going to highlight a few of the artists who've been part of the Body Electric show over the last 5 years.
I imagine, as I'm not someone who has not gone to medical school, but you're, coming from the arts, that the arts can engage us from our hearts, and that it's from an Anishinaabe perspective, intelligence is actually not just up here; it is our heart knowledge as well.
It reminds me of Lisa Boivein's piece in this very exhibit where she shows representations of Western medicine alongside Dene symbols of health and healing, and the strawberry or the heart is very central to that imagery. And I think she's bringing that forward, that is at the core of well-being and healing. Is there a unique role for art by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit artists in the Body Electric?
I think a lot about how we think about healthcare, how medicine is constructed from this biomedical lens in which we're trained as physicians, in which it is a particular form of science that we learn and that we value. And it is very distinct from art, culture, land-based activities, which when I think about things from an Anishinaabe perspective of well-being and healing is integral to health and to healing. And so what a lot of the work that I try to do as an educator is to really expose that and make explicit that we're learning a particular way of thinking about health.
I mean, I think we're so used to thinking in the medical humanities of art as extra. But I think what you're saying really puts it in perspective. This is another form of knowledge, another form of health, another form of well-being that should exist in a holistic way with other ways of knowing about health and of being well. Yeah.
I think there's also a parallel, or of course there's a colonial parallel in health and the arts, and that there has been an assumed neutrality to a certain worldview or a way of knowing or seeing the world in the health and in arts institutions also. So, a lot in the mainstream art world, Indigenous arts and artists have historically not been included in those spaces.
Yeah, very true. I remember, Lisa, when we walked with an elder at the Art Gallery of Ontario and looked at Norval Morrisseau's Man Changing into Thunderbird. And he reminded us that some of these images and this knowledge comes from birch bark scrolls, which would have been looked at on the ground, where people would be gathered around and looking down at it, not hanging on a wall.
Well, I think also the inclusion of art in like healthcare settings in the past have been used really to create a calming effect for people. And so it's often, but that's interpreted through a certain worldview. So you often see, in my experience as a patient in the system, um, it's often, I often would see a lot of watercolors, a lot of landscape, and often, not well looked at, aging or water stained, which I don't mind so much, but I just thought, well, who are you? What is that? What are those images catering to, or who is it catering to? Who are you? Yeah, who is it for?
Well, maybe sometimes we'd like to be taken by storm, not, soothed with a nice pastel palette. I really like that point.
I think all three of those artists are really have a strong Indigenous aesthetic, and that they do speak to the relational and relationships. I mean, into the natural world, to medicines, to history, to reframing, to healing. That's both very, very. That's the connection I see between those three artists and their work. That's
Well, and
strong.
even if you look at Raven's work, for example, in the actual technical component, the relationship piece that's seen in the continuity of the lines and the connectedness, similar to many of them, some of the most famous Indigenous artists, but you really do see that there. So the relationality in the actual physical work and technique. It's also, I was thinking that it's also distinct from the way in which we, all three of us, actually, because we've collaborated in this way, have used art in a medical education setting to teach learners, medical students, and residents about different perspectives on health, including Indigenous ones. And in that, as you said, Allison, we are disrupting. So the use of art in a medical education context, rather than soothing, which is the way in which it's sometimes used in a healthcare setting or is meant to calm, is actually meant to unsettle and unseat people's assumptions.
Do you think there's any danger to or caution to including Indigenous arts within medicine?
It's funny because I'm often asked about how do we make our healthcare spaces more inclusive and safer, culturally safe is the language that we use for Indigenous peoples, for patients and community members. And I am not joking that often people will say, well, we'd like to put art on the wall. We'd like to buy some Indigenous art. And I was just writing about the fact that is but one component. Let's think about what to put on the walls once we've actually dismantled the metaphorical walls to receiving high quality healthcare that is free of racism for Indigenous peoples. When that work has been done around the inclusive policies, the hiring of Indigenous practitioners and leaders and others in the organization, the creation of policies against racism, then of course the creation of safe spaces is important, and art is a critical aspect of that. So it can actually even perpetuate that colonial gaze and that colonial gaze within our practice.
It's so true. How many people in institutions know who the artists are? or have a unique sense of the specificity and the sovereignty of individual communities and people. I think that's the other thing too. It can almost become a fetish in the other extreme, where it's seen as rarefied and removed from context.
Of course, you see the two very distinct worlds in opposition to one another in Tia's piece too.
Yeah.
And I was thinking a lot about it because, as a part of my day today and this first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, I was actually looking at art created by students in residential schools and also survivors, as we say, of residential school, because we're not really meant to use the word students anymore because we realized they weren't schools.
Mm-hmm.
But what can we learn about the experience of the children there from looking at the art?
Well, and when I look at her piece, it's so it is troubled, like or layered. There's a layering that she is remembering through her own art making, the experiences that she never knew of directly of her grandmother in residential school, who learned this art in residential school. So she's remembering, remaking, and it does create this to me anyway, this almost painful remembrance and beauty that becomes a strength and like a thing of beauty through the art. So the process seems as important as the final work.
It is about the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about it's not about the final product, which is what the Western commodified art process to me is so much more interesting, and where change happens.
Is it a leap, do you think, to say that art in these contexts and in these ways, in these multifaceted ways, could be a space and conducive to reconciliation?
It reminds me of something that I heard Senator Murray Sinclair say this morning, and there was an interview with him for the Day of Truth and Reconciliation, the first day being today, and he spoke about reconciliation is not a spectator sport, but it's quite literal in this case of what you're talking about, right? It's not about just putting art on the wall and saying, okay, we've ticked a box, and that is inclusivity.